Go get a calendar, an actual one, not a figure of speech. Because the thing I am about to tell you only lands properly once you count it yourself, and almost nobody has ever counted it. This year, the government published its own report on the condition of Social Security. Not a think tank, not a website, the trustees of the program, in writing, signed by the commissioner and 3 cabinet secretaries. And that report says the retirement trust fund runs out of reserves in the 4th quarter of 2032. Now here is what everyone does with that number, and here is why it never changes anybody's behavior. They leave it as a year. And a year sounds like a thing that happens to somebody else later in a news story you have here in another room. So let me convert it into the only unit that actually means anything to a person living on this money: checks. Count the months between the check that lands this month and the last quarter of 2032. You will get somewhere in the neighborhood of 75. 75 more checks at the full amount. Then, unless Congress acts, the amount changes. Not to zero. I want to be extremely clear about that, and I am going to spend real time on it. But it changes by about 22% for everybody, current retirees included, not future retirees, you. 75 is not a number you file away for later. 75 is a number you can count on your fingers if you have enough of them and enough patience. It is closer than a mortgage. It is closer than most car loans. And the reason I am starting here instead of with outrage is that the outrage version of this story has been playing for 30 years, and it has changed exactly nothing, while the number got closer every single year. So let me do something different. I am going to tell you precisely what is true, precisely what is not, what the actual options are without telling you which one to pick, how to make yourself heard in a way that is not immediately dismissed, and then the part almost nobody covers, which is what you do with your own money regardless of what any of them decide. Because both of these things are true at the same time. This can only be fixed in Washington, and you should not build the rest of your life on the assumption that Washington will fix it on schedule. First, the most important sentence in this entire video, and if you take nothing else, take this: Social Security does not go bankrupt. It cannot. The trust fund is not the program. The trust fund is a savings account sitting next to the program. Money comes into Social Security every 2 weeks from every working person in this country, and that never stops as long as people are working. The trust fund is the extra that got built up over decades, and it is what covers the gap between what comes in and what goes out. Right now, that reserve is around $2.5 trillion, and it dropped by roughly $160 billion last year. It is being drawn down on purpose because that is what it was there for. When it is empty, the program does not close. Payroll taxes keep arriving. Those taxes cover about 78% of what is scheduled to be paid. 78% is where the 22% comes from. That is the entire arithmetic. It is not a punishment, and it is not a policy decision. It is what happens automatically when the money coming in is less than the money going out, and there is nothing left in the savings account to make up the difference. So anybody who tells you the checks stop is wrong, and anybody who tells you nothing happens is also wrong. What happens is that everybody's check gets smaller on the same day. My name is Kevin. I read the rules so you do not have to. Every week I go looking for the thing that quietly decides what happens to your money, and I bring it here before it costs you anything. If that sounds useful, subscribe and turn on the bell, because in a few minutes I am going to walk through the specific things people are told about this that are simply not accurate, and one of them is probably something you believe right now. Let me tell you what changed this year, because the date moved and it is worth knowing why. Last year's report put the retirement fund's depletion 1 quarter later than this year's does. So the deadline came closer by 3 months in the space of 12. Part of that is the long, slow thing that has been happening since 2009, which is that payroll taxes have not covered annual costs for that entire stretch. Fewer workers per retiree, people living longer, which is a good thing that costs money, wages growing more slowly than anybody projected. And part of it is more recent and more specific. The tax law passed last year reduced the amount of tax that many seniors owe on their benefits. Some of that tax money flows back into the trust funds. Less tax collected on benefits means less revenue going back in. Now, I want to be careful and fair here because this is exactly the kind of thing that gets turned into a political weapon by both sides within about an hour. That tax change genuinely helped a lot of people in this audience. If you got the senior deduction, that was real money, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. It also, mechanically, reduced revenue flowing to the trust funds. Both of those statements are true. They are not in conflict. That is simply what the trade-off was. And the longer-term picture got worse in a way that got less attention. The size of the shortfall over the next 75 years, measured against payroll, grew by about 16% in a single year's report. So the honest summary is this: the date is close. It moved closer. And the size of the problem underneath it grew. Let me tell you about Clyde. Clyde is 69. He lives outside Marion, Ohio, and he ran a 2-truck excavating outfit for most of his working life. He sold the equipment when his back gave out, and he retired on Social Security, a small amount from the sale, and whatever he had managed to put aside. He does a thing that a lot of careful people do. He has a sheet of paper, handwritten, that projects his income out year by year, and he uses it to decide what he can afford. And every year on that sheet, the Social Security number is the same, adjusted upward a little for the cost of living increase. That sheet has him fine, comfortable even, right through his 80s. He built it that way because that is what he was told the number was. Nobody handed him a report. Nobody at any point in his life sat him down and said, "By the way, the figure you are writing on that line is scheduled through a certain year, and after that it is a different figure unless something happens." His plan is not wrong because he made a mistake. His plan is wrong because he was given one number and there were two. And I want to be precise about what that actually costs somebody like him, because it is not abstract. If a household is running close to the line, a reduction of roughly a fifth is not a matter of eating out less. For a couple where both people receive an average benefit, the reduction would run somewhere in the range of $10,000 a year off the household. That is a figure from the analysis of this year's report, not something I estimated. $10,000 a year is a car. It is a year of a supplement premium and a good deal of the medication that goes with it. For a lot of households, it is the entire margin between comfortable and careful, or between careful and something worse. And here is the part about Clyde that I keep coming back to. He is not a man who avoids bad news. He ran a business. He handled equipment loans and payroll, and the year the work dried up. If somebody had put the real figure in front of him 10 years ago, he would have planned differently, and he would have had 10 years to do it in. Nobody did. And the reason nobody did is not a conspiracy. It is that this information lives inside a 400-page actuarial report, and the version of it that reaches ordinary people has been converted into an argument before it arrives. Now, I want to stop right here because Clyde is exactly why I built the thing I am about to tell you about. He does not need somebody to tell him to be angry at Washington. He has that covered. What he needed was for one person, once, to explain what the number on that line actually is, so he could plan around the real thing instead of around a headline. That is what the quiet rules is. Plain English, written large, on the things that quietly decide what your money does and what you can actually control about them, so a person can sit at a kitchen table with a pencil and a sheet of paper and be working from the truth. You can find it at kevinexplains.shop. The link is in the description below and in the pinned comment at the top. And if you are watching this on a television right now, there is a code on the screen you can point your phone camera at. 7-day guarantee, always. If it does not hand you something you did not have before, you send it back. Go look at whatever sheet of paper or spreadsheet you plan from if you have one. Does it have one number on that line, or does it have two? Now let me go through the things people believe about this that are not true, because you will hear every single one of these, and you cannot have a useful conversation with anybody until they are cleared away. The first one, the government stole the money and the trust fund is full of worthless paper. No, by law, every surplus dollar that came into Social Security was required to be invested in United States Treasury securities. That is not a scheme, that is a statute, and it has worked that way since the beginning. Those securities pay interest, and the trust funds earned real interest last year, in the tens of billions. Now, is it fair to say that the government borrowed the money and spent it on other things? Yes, that is exactly what happens when anybody buys a treasury bond. That is what a treasury bond is. It is also what your pension fund did, what banks do, and what most of the governments on earth do with their reserves. If those securities were worthless, the problem would not be Social Security. The problem would be everything. And there is a version of this belief that is more sophisticated and that I want to address separately because thoughtful people land on it. Some people say, fine, the bonds are real, but the interest on them has to be paid out of general tax revenue, so it is all just the same pot in the end. That is a legitimate observation about federal accounting, and I am not going to wave it away. But notice what it does and does not mean. It does not mean the money was taken. It means the federal government borrowed from itself, the way it borrows from everybody else, and owes itself back with interest. Every dollar has been accounted for annually in public for decades. The reason this matters is not academic. If you believe the money was stolen, then the only fix that makes sense to you is to get it back, and there is nothing to get back. If you understand the actual mechanism, then you can evaluate the actual options, which are the 4 I am going to lay out in a few minutes. Being angry at the wrong thing feels identical to being angry at the right thing, and it accomplishes considerably less. The second one. It is a Ponzi scheme, and it will collapse. A Ponzi scheme is a fraud built on secrecy that dies the moment new money stops coming in. Social Security publishes its books every year. The report I have been quoting is public, and anyone can read it. It promises modest, defined benefits rather than extraordinary returns, and it has not missed a payment since payments began. It is a pay-as-you-go system, which is genuinely different from a scheme. Whether pay-as-you-go is good design is a real argument that reasonable people have. It is not the same argument as calling it a fraud. The third one. Immigrants are draining it. People who are not authorized to be in the country cannot collect retirement benefits. Proof of lawful status is part of the application, and it is verified. And a substantial amount of payroll tax gets paid every year under numbers that will never result in a benefit being claimed. That is money going in that does not come out. You can hold any view you like about immigration policy generally. That is your business, and it is a legitimate debate. But as an explanation for the trust fund's condition, it does not hold up, and it is worth knowing that before somebody uses it on you as a reason nothing else needs to be done. The fourth one. It is riddled with fraud, and cleaning that up would fix it. There is fraud. There is fraud in every program of this size. But the category people are usually pointing at is improper payments, and the large majority of those are not fraud at all. They are overpayments to people who kept working and crossed the annual earnings limit, or who moved, or whose paperwork lagged behind their life. Those get recovered. Improper payments run at a very small fraction of what the program pays out. Recovering every dollar of them would not close a gap measured in trillions. That does not mean they should be ignored. It means they are not the answer to this particular question. And the fifth one, which is the one I find most corrosive. Relax. Congress always fixes it at the last minute. Historically, that is not wrong. In the early 1980s, this program came within months of the same wall, and a Republican president and a Democratic speaker cut a deal that held for decades. But look closely at what that deal actually contained, because this matters enormously. They raised the full retirement age from 65 to 67. They began taxing benefits. Those changes were not applied to the people who were already retired and already voting. They were applied to the people who were younger. That is what a last-minute fix looks like. It is not painless. It is a set of cuts aimed at whoever is least able to object at the moment the deal is struck. So yes, they will probably do something. The question is what and to whom, and the later it happens, the fewer good options are left on the table. And I want to spend one more minute on that because the timing point is the single most important thing in this entire video, and it is the thing nobody explains properly. Every year that passes, the same shortfall has to be closed, with fewer remaining years to close it in. That means each option gets more severe, not less. Think about it in terms of a tax increase, whichever way you feel about tax increases. If the payroll rate had been raised by a very small amount 30 years ago, phased in slowly, almost nobody would have noticed. Done today, all at once, the increase required to keep the program solvent is a great deal larger, because it has to do the same work in less time. The same is true on the benefit side. A gradual adjustment starting decades ago, applied to people with 30 years to plan around it, is a completely different thing from an adjustment applied to somebody who is 74 next year. That is what delay actually costs. Not the debate, not the arguing. Every year of waiting converts a manageable adjustment into a painful one. And it does that automatically, whether anybody in Washington ever votes on anything or not. So when somebody tells you there is plenty of time, they are describing the calendar. They are not describing the arithmetic. Let me tell you about Maybelle. Maybelle is 74. She lives in a small town in Georgia. She raised 3 children mostly alone, and she worked in a school cafeteria and then at a fabric store, and her benefit is not large. She heard the 22% figure on television, and she did what a lot of people did, which is nothing, because she assumed it meant the program was ending and there was no point. Then a few months later, she heard someone say it was all made up and nothing was happening at all, and she believed that too and felt relieved. Both of those things cannot be right, and neither of them is. And this is what I think the actual damage is. It is not that people panic. It is that they are handed two versions, one hysterical and one dismissive. They cannot tell which is which, so they stop listening entirely, and then no letter and no vote and no plan ever happens. Her benefit is small enough that a 22% reduction is not an inconvenience. It is the heating bill. That is exactly the gap the guide exists to close, not to make you an expert, to give one plain version of what is actually true, so you can act on it instead of being pushed back and forth between two people yelling. Same place, kevinexplains.shop, link in the description, pinned comment at the top, and the code on your screen if you are watching this on the television. 7-day guarantee, no questions, no argument. A woman in Georgia sitting in front of a television, told twice in 1 year that opposite things were true, and deciding it was easier to stop paying attention. Now let me lay out the actual options on the table, and I want to be very clear about how I am going to do this. I am going to describe each one accurately, including who it helps and who it costs. I am not going to tell you which to support. I have an audience that spans every political position in this country, and I think you are all perfectly capable of deciding what you believe once somebody puts the choices in front of you honestly. There are really only 4 levers. Everything anybody proposes is some combination of them. Lever 1. Bring in more money by raising or removing the cap. Right now, Social Security tax applies to earnings up to about $184,500. Above that, no more Social Security tax is owed on the additional earnings. So a person earning that amount and a person earning several million pay the same amount into the program. Removing that cap entirely would close a very substantial share of the long-term gap on its own. Supporters say the cap is why the program is short in the first place, given how much income has moved above that line over 40 years. Opponents say it is a large tax increase on a group that is already paying a great deal, that it breaks the link between what you pay in and what you get out, and that the money will simply be spent elsewhere. Both of those are real arguments made by serious people. Lever 2. Raise the retirement age. This is what was done in the 80s, and it is on the table again. Supporters say people live considerably longer than they did in 1935, and the program should reflect that. Opponents make a point I think everybody should understand, regardless of which side they land on. Raising the retirement age is a benefit cut. It is not a neutral adjustment. If you have to wait longer for the full amount, you either lose those years of payments or you claim early and take a permanently reduced check for the rest of your life. And it falls hardest on people whose work was physical, who often cannot keep doing it and do not live as long. Lever 3. Means testing or changing the benefit formula at the top. This means reducing or eliminating benefits for people with high income or high lifetime earnings. Supporters say the program should concentrate on people who need it. Opponents say it turns an earned benefit into a welfare program, that everybody paid in under the same rules, and that programs perceived as welfare lose political support and get cut further later. Lever 4. Change how the increases are calculated. Every year, benefits rise by a cost of living adjustment. There is a version of that calculation that would grow more slowly, which saves money gradually and enormously over decades. There is another version, built around what older households actually spend money on, which would generally grow faster and cost more. Whichever direction you favor, understand that this lever compounds. A small annual difference becomes an enormous difference across a 25-year retirement, which is precisely why it is fought over so hard by people who understand it. That is the whole menu. Every serious proposal is some mixture of those 4, and the arithmetic is not actually the hard part. Somebody has to be told no, and no one wants to be the one to say it. There is a 5th thing that gets raised, and I want to mention it because you will hear it, which is investing part of the trust fund, or part of individual contributions, in the stock market rather than in Treasury securities. Supporters point out that market returns over long periods have exceeded what Treasury securities pay, and that the current arrangement is leaving money on the table. Opponents point out that Social Security is the one piece of a retirement that is supposed to be there regardless of what markets do, and that anyone who retired into a bad stretch would find out exactly why that guarantee mattered. I am not going to resolve that for you either. But I would ask you to notice that it is a genuinely different kind of proposal from the other four. The other four adjust the size of the promise. This one changes what kind of promise it is. Now the practical part. How to actually be heard in a way that is not immediately discarded. The Capital Switchboard connects you to the offices of the people who represent you. You give your zip code and they connect you. You have 3 people, 1 representative and 2 senators. Each call takes a few minutes. And here's the part that actually matters, because most people do this in a way that gets them politely thanked and forgotten. Say you are a constituent and say where you live. That is the single thing that determines whether your call gets counted. Offices tally contacts from their own district. A passionate call from outside it is noise to them. Be specific about what you want, not save Social Security, which everybody says and which commits nobody to anything. Name a lever. Say you want the cap raised, or you do not. Say you oppose raising the retirement age, or you support it. Whatever you actually believe. Specific positions get tallied. General sentiment does not. Ask a question and wait for the answer. Ask where that member stands on the trust fund shortfall and what they intend to vote for. Then be quiet and let them answer. A question requires a response in a way that a statement does not. Be brief and be civil. The person on that phone is usually young, underpaid, and keeping a tally. They are not the villain in this story, and being unpleasant to them accomplishes nothing except that your call gets categorized differently. And write as well as call. A letter or an email in your own words gets weighted more heavily in most offices than a signature on somebody else's petition. Now, the part almost nobody covers, and the reason I made this video rather than just pointing at Washington. You cannot control the vote. You can control everything else, and a plan that only works if a specific political outcome happens on schedule is not a plan. So here is what to actually do, and none of it requires knowing what Congress will do. First, find out your actual number, not the general figure, yours. Your statement is available through your online account with the agency, and it shows what you are receiving or projected to receive. Then do the arithmetic that nobody does. Take that number and multiply by 78%. Write the second number next to the first one. That is not a prediction. I am not telling you that is what you will get, and I genuinely do not believe that is the most likely outcome. I think something passes. But that second number is the floor if nothing does, and knowing your own floor is different from knowing a percentage on the news. Second, look at what that second number does to your fixed costs, not your lifestyle, your fixed costs, the mortgage or rent, the utilities, the insurance, the medication. If the floor still covers those, you have a manageable problem. If it does not, you have a real one, and you would rather know that now, with years to work with, than find out in a month when it happens. Third, understand which of your money is exposed to this and which is not. Social Security is exposed. A pension is a separate promise from a separate entity. Money in your own accounts is yours, regardless of what any vote says. That mix matters, and most people have never looked at it as a mix. Fourth, and this is the one people skip, if you are married, run the numbers for the survivor. When one spouse dies, the household does not keep both checks. It keeps the larger one. A household living on 2 checks becomes a household living on 1, and that shift is far larger than 22%, and it is not a projection or a policy debate. It is arithmetic that applies to nearly every married couple watching this eventually. If your plan survives that, it will survive most things. And there are 2 more things worth knowing while you are looking at all of this, because they are decisions you actually control, and most people make them without connecting them to any of this. The first is when you claim, if you have not yet. Claiming early permanently reduces the monthly amount. Waiting increases it. That trade-off exists regardless of anything in this video, and it is a real calculation involving your health, your work, your savings, and your spouse. What I will say is that people sometimes hear about a trust fund shortfall and conclude they should grab benefits as early as possible before something happens to them. I understand the instinct completely, but think it through. If a reduction eventually applies across the board, it would apply to a permanently reduced check just as much as to a full one. Claiming early to outrun a cut mostly means locking in a smaller number and then having the reduction applied to that smaller number too. That is not advice about what you should do. It is a warning about a specific piece of reasoning that sounds sensible and is not. The second is the part of your income that is entirely yours. Anything in your own accounts is not subject to a vote in Washington. Nobody in Congress adjusts it. That does not make it safe from everything, since markets do what markets do, but it does mean it sits in a different category of risk than the check does. Understanding which of your income is politically exposed and which is not is genuinely useful, and almost nobody has ever sorted it that way. Now let me give you my honest opinion, and it is only that, and you are welcome to disagree in the comments. I do not think either party is going to be honest with you about this before an election. I think the incentives run entirely the wrong way. Every one of the 4 levers I described takes something from somebody who votes, and there is no version of a fix that does not. Which is why the delay is not an accident and not incompetence. Delay is the rational strategy for anybody who wants to keep a job, because the cost of acting is immediate, and the cost of not acting arrives after the next election, and then the one after that. And I want to say one more thing that I think gets lost in every version of this discussion. The most likely outcome is not the 22% cut. I want to be honest about that, even though a scarier version would probably get more people to watch. This program is politically enormous. Something almost certainly passes. But something passing does not mean nothing happens to you. In 1983, something passed, and what passed raised the retirement age and started taxing benefits. Everybody said it was saved, and it was for a while, by taking something from a group that was not paying attention at the moment. So the question worth asking is not whether they act. It is which group is not paying attention this time. All right, here is your checklist. 1. Count your own checks. Look at a calendar, find the last quarter of 2032, and count the months. That number is real, and it belongs to you. 2. Find your actual benefit amount, multiply it by 78%, and write both numbers down side by side. Check whether the smaller one covers your fixed costs. 3. If you are married, do the same exercise for the surviving spouse living on one check, because that is a larger change than the one this video is about. 4. Call all 3 of your people. Say you are a constituent, name where you live, name a specific position, ask a direct question, and be brief and decent about it. Let me leave you with this. Clyde has a handwritten sheet with 1 number on a line where there should be 2. Maybelle heard 2 opposite things in 1 year, could not tell which was true, and stopped listening. And her benefit is small enough that this is her heating bill. Neither of them was foolish. Both of them were handed a political argument when what they needed was arithmetic. So do the arithmetic. It takes 10 minutes and a calculator, and it belongs to you no matter what anybody in Washington decides. Then make the calls, because that part belongs to you too. 75 checks, that is the number. Go count it yourself and see if I am right. I am Kevin. Thanks for watching. Do not forget to check the quiet rules at kevinexplains.shop.